Welcome, Wapham crew, new listeners, elves, orcs, Krampus, Santa Claus, whoever might be listening. Merry Christmas to all. And to all a good night. Well, we are live tonight from the Mile High Clubhouse. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, December 25th, Monday, December 26th for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm your host, TessaTNT. I'm so glad you can join us this evening, and I hope you had an awesome weekend, a wonderful Christmas. I hope you are just, having fun, hanging out with your family, and keeping nice, cozy, and warm. I hope you're not in the frozen abyss of the East Coast. That Arctic weather is just insane. Totally insane. So if you're listening to us live right now, you may be listening to us on KPNL Radio, which you can find on KPNL Radio at kpnl-db.com. You may also find us on Saturdays at eTalk Radio on etalk.tv/radio. If you want to hit us up in your free time, whether you're working it, or working out, please be sure that you check us out once more under We Are Paradox Media at Spreaker, Twitter, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Facebook, Castbox, Tumblr, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser, and Podvine. So tonight I have a treat for all my guys and gals out there. Tonight we are going to go back to the Victorian era, where people used to actually sit around and read ghost stories. Back before the television age, that's how family members and friends would entertain each other. Sit around and tell ghost stories. So ghost stories became a Christmas tradition in Victorian England. Spooky stories featuring the supernatural were all the rage during the darkest time of the year. Towards the end of each year, as fireplaces are lit and hot cocoa is made, Americans have made it a tradition to revisit their favorite classic holiday books, movies, and songs. And though ghost stories may seem out of place in present-day American holiday celebrations, they were once a Christmas staple, reaching their peak of popularity in Victorian England. A dark, spooky time of the year, like most long-standing cultural customs, the precise origin of telling ghost stories at the end of the year is unknown, largely because it began as an oral tradition without written records, but according to Sarah Cleto, a folklorist specializing in British literature and co-founder of the Carter Haas School of Folklore and the Fantastic, the season around winter solstice has been one of transition and change. For a very, very long time, the season has provoked oral stories about spooky things in many different countries and cultures all over the world, she says. Oh my gosh, and then there's a bunch of little gibberish there. Furthermore, spooky storytelling gave people something to do during the long, dark evenings before electricity. The long midwinter nights meant folks had to stop working early, and they spent their leisure hours huddled close to a fire, says Tara Moore, an assistant professor of English at Elizabethtown College, author of Victorian Christmas in Print, and editor of Valancourt Book of Victorian Christmas Ghost Stories. Plus, you didn't need to be illiterate to retell the local ghost story. Effects of the industrialization revolution. It was in Victorian England that telling supernatural tales at the end of the year, specifically during the Christmas season, went from an oral tradition to a timely trend. This was in part due to the development of steam-powered printing press during the Industrial Revolution that made the written word more widely available. This gave Victorians the opportunity to commercialize and commodify existing oral ghost stories, turning them into a version they could sell. Higher literacy rates, cheaper printing costs, and more periodicals meant that editors needed to fill pages, Moore says. Around Christmas time, they figured they could convert the old storytelling tradition to a printed version. People who moved out of their towns and villages and into larger cities still wanted access to the supernatural sagas they heard around the fireplace growing up. Okay. Fortunately, Victorian authors like Elizabeth Gaskell, Margaret Oliphant, and Arthur Conan Doyle, so that's Conan Doyle, Arthur Conan Doyle, worked through the fall to cook up these stories and have them ready to print in time for Christmas, Moore says. Industrialization not only provided tools to distribute spooky stories, uncertainty during the era also fueled interest in the genre, says Brittany Warman, a folklorist specializing in Gothic literature and co-founder of the Carter Hall School of Folklore and the Fantastic. Interest was driven, she says, by the rise of industrialization, the rise of science, and the looming fall of Victorian Britain as a superpower. All of these things were in people's minds and made the world seem a little bit darker and a little bit scarier. Stories find a wide-ranging audience. Telling horror-filled holiday tales continued to be a family affair in England, even when they were read rather than recited. We know from illustrations and diaries that whole families read these periodicals together, Moore says. Popularity of Victorian Christmas ghost stories also transcended socioeconomic status, according to Moore. They were available to read everywhere, from cheap publications to expensive Christmas annuals that middle-class ladies would show off on their coffee tables. Their broad audience was reflected in the stories themselves, which sometimes centered around working-class characters, and other times took place in haunted manor houses. These upper-class settings were intended to invite readers from all classes into an idealized upper-crust Christmas, the type today's fans of Downton Abbey still enjoy as entertainment, Moore adds. Charles Dickens' 1843 novella A Christmas Carol has forever linked the British author with the holiday season, but his contributions to Christmas in Victorian England included the tradition of telling and reading ghost stories, extend far beyond Jacob Marley's visit to Scrooge. In fact, Cleto says that Dickens played a huge part in popularizing the genre in England. He wrote a bunch of different Christmas novellas, several of which involved ghosts specifically, she says, and then he started editing more and more Christmas ghost stories from other people, and working those into the magazines he was already editing, and that just caught like wildfire. Dickens also helped shape Christmas literature in general, Moore says, by formalizing expectations about themes like forgiveness and reunion during the holiday season. American Christmas traditions, more syrupy than spooky. Although countless trends made their way from England to America during the Victorian era, the telling of ghost stories during the Christmas season was not one that really caught on. Christmas Carol was an immediate bestseller in the United States, but at the time of its publication, Dickens was arguably the most famous writer in the world, and already widely popular. The novella's success in the U.S. likely had more to do with Dickens' existing massive fan base than it did Americans' interest in incorporating the supernatural into Christmas. American Christmas scenes and stories tended to be syrupy sweet, Moore explains. There were a few American writers of the period trying to put Victorian style Christmas ghost stories into American culture, Warman says, including Nathaniel Hawthorne and Henry James. Washington Irving made a similar and earlier attempt, slipping the supernatural into Christmas themed short stories published in 1819 and 1820. Warman theorizes that America's reluctance to embrace the Christmas ghost story tradition had to do, at least in part, with the country's attitudes towards things like magic and superstitions. In America, we generally had a bit of resistance to the supernatural in a way that European countries didn't, she explains. When you came to America, you came with a fresh start. You came with a secular mindset and the idea that you were leaving the past behind. And some of these spooky superstitions were thought of as being part of the past. Another reason telling spooky stories never took off as a Christmas tradition in the United States was because it became more firmly established as a Halloween tradition, thanks to Irish and Scottish immigrants. That really impacted culture here because they brought with them a concept similar to Halloween, and that became, for America, the time period for ghosts, Foreman explains. Traces of the tradition. Other than A Christmas Carol, there is another piece of pop culture that reflects the Victorian Christmas tradition, a single line from a song written and released in 1963 by American musicians. First recorded by Andy Williams, the song "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year" lists scary ghost stories as one of the highlights of the holiday season. Although it's unclear why writers of the song, Edward Pola and George Weil, included the tradition, Cleto says that it's possible that the lyrics is a reference to Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It's only the one text, she notes, but it's such a big deal here in the US and the UK, and is pretty much all that Americans know about Christmas ghost stories in isolation. So I sent Mia the link because she called me like 2 minutes before the show kicked off, and she has a story to share, but she's having issues getting that to go on her phone, so I'm not quite sure. We might try to get her in here the second hour. I don't want to wait too late to get her on, but yes, super excited to have her on. She wants to talk about Zach Bagans' Haunted Museum and some experiences she had while in Vegas. So I'm super excited to hear about that. I'm going to message her back really quick and just tell her, I think she has to do it through Facebook, but I'm not sure. We can try it on, maybe on Skype. Let me turn that on and see. Alright, so let me turn my Skype on real quick. And hopefully she can get through there, but I'm not certain that's gonna work, so we'll get on with the show. Let me make sure everything's working over here. So yeah, Merry Christmas. I hope everybody had an awesome Christmas. I had Christmas dinner and we had ham, green beans, mashed potatoes, gravy. I forgot to make the freaking stuffing, homemade cranberry sauce, and we also had ambrosia salad. I don't know if you guys have had that, but it's delightful. I actually forgot to put the marshmallows in there, but that's okay because you put the marshmallows in there and then they kind of get soggy after a while. But yes. So I'm going to go over here to Facebook as well because I know that this video is broadcasting there and I get comments there, and I haven't been able to see them here on the screen. Hello, Miss Gayleen Black. Merry Christmas. Kasango Samuel. Merry Christmas to you and all of those beautiful children you're taking care of. If you guys can look him up on Facebook, if you're feeling generous and you want to make donations, they are constantly needing donations to take care of these beautiful little children that he cares for. They were trying to raise funds for their Christmas celebration. I hope that they made it. I was able to donate. Luckily, I did that before I ran out of money, but yeah, you can find them under Kasango Samuel, and it's KASANGO SAMUEL. So if you can look him up, he's got some links there. I also have some links on my personal Facebook page. Oh, it would be so awesome if you guys could donate. I mean, these kids are so beautiful. I just love their energy and what's going on with them. So I don't know if those of you on Facebook can hear the music. The background music, I like to have that for ghost stories. Hopefully it's not too loud. So we're at chapter 8, The Carriage House Ghosts. While casually leafing through the pages of Tomorrow magazine, periodical devoted to psychical research in which my byline appears on occasion, I noticed a short piece by Wainwright Evans called Ghost in Crinoline. Written in the spring of 1959, the article told of a spectral inhabitant at 422.5 West 46th Street in New York City. It seemed that Ruth Shaw, an artist who had for years lived in the rear section of the old building, which she had turned into a studio for herself, had spoken to Mr. Evans about her experiences. He had come to see her at Clinton Court, as the building still is called. There is a charming iron gate through which you pass by the main house into a court. Beyond the court rises an arcaded rear section, 3 stories high and possessed of an outdoor staircase leading to the top. This portion dates back to 1809 or perhaps even before, and was at one time used as the coach house of Governor DeWitt Clinton. Miss Shaw informed Evans about the legends around the place, and in her painstaking manner told him of her conversations with 90-year-old Mr. Oates, a neighborhood druggist. An English coachman with a Danish wife once lived in the rooms above the stables. The first ghost ever to be seen at Clinton Court was that of Old Moore, a sailor hanged for mutiny at the Battery and buried in Potter's Field, which was only a short block away from the house. Today, this cemetery has disappeared beneath the teeming tenement houses of the Middle West Side, Hell's Kitchen outer approaches. But Old Moore, as it were, did not have far to go to haunt anyone. Clinton Court was the first big house in his path. The coachman's wife saw the apparition, and while running away from Old Moore, fell down the stairs. This was more unfortunate, as she was expecting a child at the time. She died from the fall, but the child survived. The irony of it was that soon the mother's ghost was seen around the court too, usually hanging around the baby. Thus, ghost number 2 joined the cast at the governor's old house. One of the grandchildren of the Clinton family who had been told these stories used to play ghosts the way children nowadays play cops and robbers. This girl named Margaret used to put on old-fashioned clothes and run up and down the big stairs. One fine day she tripped and fell down the stairs, making the game grim reality. Many have seen the pale little girl. Miss Shaw was among them. She described her as wearing a white blouse, full sleeves, and a crinoline. On one occasion, she saw the girl ghost skipping down the stairs in plain daylight. Skipping is the right word, for ghosts need not actually walk. It often floats just a little bit above ground, not quite touching it. I thought it would be a good idea to give Miss Shaw a ring, but discovered there was no telephone at the address. Miss Shaw had moved away, and even the local police sergeant could not tell me where the house was. Police assured me there was no such number as 422.5 West 46th Street. Fortunately, I have a low opinion of police intelligence, so my search continued. Perhaps a dozen times I walked by numbers 424 and 420 West 46th Street before I discovered the strange archway at number 420. I walked through it, somehow driven on by an inner feeling that I was on the right track. I was, for before me opened Clinton Court. It simply was tucked away in back of 420, and the new owners had neglected to put the 422.5 number anywhere within sight. Now an expensive remodeled apartment house, the original walls and arrangements were still intact. On the wall facing the court, number 420 proudly displayed bronze plaque inscribed Clinton Court, California, 1840, restored by the American Society for Preservation of Future Antiquities. The rear building, where Miss Shaw's studio used to be, was now empty. Apparently, the carpenters had just finished fixing the floors and the apartment was up for rent. I thought that fortunate, for it meant we could get into the place without worrying about the tenant. There was still the matter of finding out who the landlord was and getting permission. It took me several weeks and much conversation until I finally got permission to enter the place one warm evening in August of 1960. Meanwhile, I had been told by the superintendent that an old crony by the name of Mrs. Buttram lived next door at number 424, and that she might know something of interest. I found Mrs. Buttram without difficulty. Having been warned that she kept a large number of pets, my nose led me to her door. For 25 years, she assured me, she had lived there and had heard many stories about ghosts next door. She had never seen anything herself, but when I pressed her for details, she finally said, "Well, they say it's a young girl of about 16. One of the horses they used to keep back there broke loose and frightened her, ran down the stairs and fell to her death. That's what they say." I thanked Mrs. Buttram and went home. I called my good friend Mrs. Myers and asked her to accompany me to a haunted house without telling her any more than that. To my surprise, Mrs. Myers told me on the phone she thought she could see the place clairvoyantly that very instant. There is a pair of stairs outside of a house and a woman in white in a kind of backyard. This conversation took place on August 9th, a week before Mrs. Myers knew anything about the location or nature of our case. About a week later, we arrived together at Clinton Court and proceeded immediately into the ground floor studio apartment of the former coach house. In subdued light, we sat quietly on the shabby used-up furniture. "Let me look around and see what I get," Mrs. Myers said, and rose. Slowly, I followed her around the apartment, which lay in ghostly silence. Across the yard, the windows of the front section were ablaze with light, and the yard itself was lit up by floodlights. But it was a quiet night. The sounds of Hell's Kitchen did not intrude into our atmosphere, as if someone bent on granting us privacy for a little while were muffling them. I feel funny in the head, bloated. You understand, I am her now. There are wooden steps from the right on the outside of the place. Mrs. Myers pointed at a wall. There, where the wall now is, they took them down, I'm sure. On close inspection, I noticed traces of something that may have been a staircase. The woman in white, young, teenager, She's a bride. She's fallen down those steps on her wedding night. Her head is battered in. Horror came over Mrs. Meyer's face. Then she continued. It is cold. The dress is so flimsy and flowing. She is disappointed, for someone has disappointed her. Deep in thought, Mrs. Meyer sat down in one of the chairs in a little room off the big, sunken living room that formed the main section of the studio apartment now, as the new owners had linked two apartments to make one bigger one. She has dark hair, blue eyes, light complexion. I'd say she's in her middle teens and wears a pretty dress, almost like a nightgown. The kind they used to have 75 or 100 years ago. But now I see her in a gingham or checkered dress with high neck, long sleeves, a white hat. She's ready for a trip, only someone doesn't come. There is crying, disappointment. Then there is a seafaring man also, with a blue hat, with shiny visor, a blue coat. He's a heavy-set man. I thought of old Moore. Mrs. Myers was getting her impressions all at the same time. Of course she knew nothing of either the young girl ghost or the sailor. Now the medium told a lively tale of a young girl ready to marry a young man, but persuaded and pursued by another, older man. I can hear her scream. She grabbed her own throat and violently suppressed a scream, the kind of sound that might have invited an unwelcome audience to our seance. Avoiding the man, she rushes up the stairs. It is a slippery and cold day around Christmas. She's carrying something heavy, maybe wood and coal, and it's the eve of her marriage, but she's pushed off the roof. There are two women. The older one had been berating the girl and pushed her out against the fence, and over she went. It was cold and slippery and nobody's fault, but instead of a wedding, there is a funeral. The medium was now in full trance. Again, a scream is suppressed. Then the voice changes, and another personality speaks through Mrs. Myers. "Who are you?" I said, as I always do on such occasions. Identification is a must when you communicate with ghosts. Instead, the stranger said anxiously, "Matthew!" "Who is Matthew?" I said. "Why won't he come? Where is he? Why?" "Who are you?" "Bernice." "How old are you?" "Is 17. "What year is this?" 80. But then the anguish came to the fore again. "Where is he? He has the ring. My head. Matthew, Matthew." She pushed me. She is in hell. I'm ready to go. I'm dressed. We are going to Father. I'm dressed. As she repeated her pleas, the voice gradually faded out. Then, just as suddenly as she had given way to the stranger, Mrs. Meyer's own personality returned. As we walked out of the gloomy studio apartment, I mused about the story that had come from Mrs. Meyer's lips. Probably servant girls, I thought, and impossible to trace. Still, she got the young girl, her falling off the stairs themselves, and the ghostly sailor. Clinton Court is still haunted, all right. I looked up at the reassuringly lighted modern apartments around the yard and wondered if the ghost knew the difference. If you ever happen to be in Hell's Kitchen, step through the archway at 420 West 46th Street into the yard, and if you are real quiet, and a bit lucky, of course, perhaps you will meet the teenage ghost in her white dress or crinoline. But beware of old Moore and his language. You know what sailors are like. Hello, Mr. Cardenas. Chapter 9. Brooklyn Hinnie. Clinton Street, Brooklyn, is one of the oldest sections of that borough, pleasantly middle class at one time, and still among Brooklyn's best neighborhoods as neighborhoods go. The house in question is in the 300 block and consists of 4 stories. There was a basement floor, then a parlor floor a few steps up, as is the usual custom with brownstone houses, with a 3rd and 4th floor above it. Each level was capable of serving as an apartment for those who wished to live there. The house was more than 100 years old at the time of the events herein described, and the records are somewhat dim beyond a certain point. In the 1960s, the house was owned by some offbeat people, about whom little was known. Even the Hall of Records isn't of much help, as the owners didn't always live in the house, and the people who lived in it were live-in guests of the actual tenants. However, for the purpose of my story, we need only concern ourselves with the 2 top floors. The 3rd floor contained 2 bedrooms and a bath, while the 4th floor consisted of a living room, dining room, kitchen, and 2nd bath. At the time my account begins, the first 2 floors were rented to an architect and his wife, and only the 2 top floors were available for new tenants. It was in the summer when 2 young ladies in their early 20s who had been living at the Brooklyn YWCA decided to find a place of their own. Somehow, they heard of the 2 vacant floors in the house on Clinton Street and immediately fell in love with it, renting the 2 top floors without much hesitation. Both Barbara and Sharon were 23 years old at the time, still going to college and trying to make ends meet on what money they could manage between them. 2 years later, Barbara was living in San Francisco with a business of her own, independently merchandising clothing. Brooklyn was only a hazy memory by then, but on August 1st of the year she and Sharon moved in, it was very much her world. Immediately after moving in, they decided to clean up the house, which needed it indeed. The stairway to the top floor was carpeted all the way up, and it was quite a job to vacuum it because there was a lot of outlets along the way, and one had to look out for extension cords. Sharon got to the top floor and was cleaning it when she removed the extension cord to plug it in further up. Instead, she just used a regular cord of the vacuum cleaner, which was about 12 feet long, using perhaps 3 feet of it, which left 9 feet of cord lying on the floor. All of a sudden, the plug just pulled out of the wall. Sharon couldn't believe her eyes. The plug actually pulled itself out of the socket and flew out onto the floor. She shook her head and put it back in, and turned the vacuum cleaner on again. Only then did she realize that she had turned the switch on the cleaner back on, when she had never actually turned it off in the first place. She couldn't figure out how that was possible, but she had a lot more work to do, so she continued with it. Later, she came downstairs and described the incident to her roommate, who thought she was out of her mind. "Wait till something happens to you," Sharon said. "There's something strange about this house." During the next 5 months, the girls heard strange noises all over the house, but they attributed it to an old house settling or the people living downstairs in the building. 5 months of peace were rudely shattered when Sharon's younger brother came to visit from New Jersey. He was still in high school and liked to listen to music at night, especially when it was played as loud as possible. The young people were sitting in the living room listening to music and talking. It was a nice, relaxed evening. All of a sudden, the stereo went off. The music had been rather loud rock and roll, and at first they thought the volume had perhaps damaged the set. Then the hallway light went out, followed by the kitchen light, so they thought a fuse had blown. Barbara ran down 4 flights of stairs into the basement to check. No fuse had blown. To be on the safe side, she checked them anyway and switched them around to make sure everything was fine. Then she went back upstairs and asked the others how the electricity was behaving. But everything was still off. At this point, Sharon's brother decided to go into the kitchen and try the lights there. Possibly there was something wrong with the switches. He went into the hallway where there was an old Tiffany-type lamp hanging at the top of the stairway. It had gone off too, and he tried to turn it on and nothing happened. He pulled again and suddenly it went on. In other words, he turned it off first, then turned it on, so it had been on in the first place. This rather bothered the young man when he announced he was going into the kitchen to get something to eat. He proceeded into the kitchen, and when he came back to join the others, he was as white as the wall. He reported that the kitchen was as cold as an icebox. But as soon as one left the kitchen, the temperature was normal in the rest of the house. The others then got up to see for themselves, and sure enough, it was icy cold in the kitchen. This was despite the fact that there were 4 or 5 radiators going, and all the windows were closed. That night, they knew they had a ghost, and for want of a better name, they called for Hendrix. It happened to have been the anniversary of Jimi Hendrix's death, and they had been playing some of his records. Shortly afterward, Toby joined the other 2 girls in the house. She moved in on April 1st. It had been relatively quiet between the incident in the kitchen and that day. Somehow, Toby's arrival was also the beginning of a new aspect of the haunting. About a week after Toby moved in, the girls were in the living room talking. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and they had dimmers on in the living room. Toby was sitting on the couch, and Barbara and some friends were sitting on the other side of the room, when all of a sudden, Toby felt a chilly breeze pass by her. It didn't touch her, but she felt it nonetheless. And just then, the lights started to dim back and forth, and when she looked up, she actually saw the dial on the dimmer moving by itself. As yet, Toby knew nothing about the haunting, so she decided to say nothing to the others, having just moved in and not wishing to have her new roommates think of her as weird. But things kept happening night after night. Usually after 11 o'clock when the girls and their friends sat around talking. After a couple of weeks, she could not stand it any longer and finally asked the others whether they could feel anything strange in the room. Barbara looked at Sharon, and a strange look passed between them. Finally, they decided to tell Toby about the haunting, and brought her up to date from the beginning of their tenancy in the house. Almost every day there was something new to report. Cooking equipment would be missing. Clothing would disappear. Windows were opened by themselves. Garbage cans would be turned over by unseen hands. Throughout that period, there was the continued walking of an unseen person in the living room located directly over the 3rd floor bedroom. And the girls heard it at any hour of the night, and once in a while, even during the day, someone was walking back and forth, back and forth. They were loud, stomping footsteps, more like women's, but they sounded as if someone were very angry. Each time, one of them went upstairs to check, and they found absolutely nothing. The girls held a conference and decided that they had a ghost. Make no mistake about it. Toby offered to look into the matter and perhaps find out what might have occurred at the house at an earlier age. Barbara kept hearing an obscure whistling, not a real tune or song that could be recognized, but a human whistle nevertheless. Meanwhile, Toby heard of a course on witchcraft and the occult being given at New York University and started to take an interest in books on the subject. But whenever there were people over to visit, they stayed in the living room upstairs past 11 o'clock at night. The ghost would simply run them out of the room with all the tricks in her ghostly trade. She would turn the stereo on and off, or make the lights go on and off. By now, they were convinced it was a woman. There were heavy shutters from the floor to the ceiling, and frequently it appeared as if a wind were coming through them and they would clap together, as if the breeze were agitating them. Immediately after that, they heard footsteps walking away from them, and there was an uncomfortable feeling in the room, making it imperative to leave and go somewhere else, usually downstairs into one of the bedrooms. As yet, no one had actually seen her. That June, Bruce, Toby's boyfriend, moved into the house with her. They had the master bedroom, and off the bedroom was a bathroom. Since Barbara would frequently walk through in the middle of the night, they left the light on in the bathroom so that she would not trip over anything. That particular night in June, Toby and her boyfriend were in bed, and she was looking up, not at the ceiling, but at the wall, when suddenly she saw a girl looking at her. It was just like an outline, like a shadow on the wall, but Toby could tell that she had long hair arranged in braids. Somehow, she had the impression that she was an Indian, perhaps because of the braids. Toby looked up at her and called the apparition to her boyfriend's attention. By the time he had focused on it, she had disappeared. He simply did not believe her. Instead, he asked Toby to go upstairs to the kitchen and make him a sandwich. What a man. Go make me a sandwich, woman. She wasn't up there for more than 5 or 10 minutes when she returned to the bedroom and found her boyfriend hidden under the covers of the bed. When she asked him what was wrong, he would shake his head, and so she looked around the room, but couldn't find anything unusual. The only thing she noticed was that the bathroom door was now wide open. She assumed that her boyfriend had gone to the bathroom, but he shook his head and told her that he had not. He had just been lying there smoking a cigarette when all of a sudden he saw the handle on the door turn by itself and the door open. When he saw that, he simply dove under the covers until Toby returned. From that moment on, he no longer laughed at her stories about a house ghost. The following night, her boyfriend was asleep when Toby woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. The television set had been left on, and she went to shut it off. And when she got back into bed, she happened to glance at the same place on the wall where she had seen the apparition the night before. For a moment or two, she saw the same outline of a girl, only this time she had the impression that the girl was smiling at her. 2 weeks after that, Toby and her boyfriend broke up. She had come back home one day and didn't know that he had left. Then she found a note in which he explained his reasons for leaving, and that he would get in touch with her later. Naturally, this upset her very much so that her 2 roommates had to calm her down. Finally, the 2 other girls went upstairs, and Toby was lying on the bed trying to compose herself. In the quiet of the room, she suddenly heard someone sob a little, and then a voice said, "Toby." Toby got up from bed and went to the bottom of the stairs and called up, demanding to know what Barbara wanted, but no one had called her. She went back to the room and lay down on the bed again. Just then she heard a voice saying, "Toby," again and again. On checking, she found that no one had called out to her, no one of flesh and blood, that is. Toby then realized who had been calling her, and she decided to talk to Henny, her nickname for Hendrix, which was the name given by the others to the ghosts since that night when they were playing Jimi Hendrix records. In a quiet voice, Toby said, "Henny, did you call me?" And then she heard the voice answer, "Calm down. Don't take it so hard. It will be all right." It was a girl's voice, and yet there was no one to be seen. The time was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and since it was in June, the room was still fairly light. Toby had hardly recovered from this experience when still another event took place. Sharon had moved out, and another girl by the name of Madeline had moved in. One day her brother came to visit them from Chicago, and he brought a friend along who had had some experience of a spiritual nature. His name was Joey, and both boys were about 20 or 21 years old. Madeline and her brother were much interested in the occult, and they brought a Ouija board to the house on Saturday, December 19th. While it was snowing outside and the atmosphere was just right for a seance, they decided to make contact with the unhappy ghost in the house. They went upstairs into the living room and sat down with the board. At first it was going to be a game, and they were asking silly questions of it, such as who was going to marry whom, and other romantic fluff. But halfway through the session, they decided to try to contact the ghost in earnest. The three girls and Madeline's brother sat down on the floor with their knees touching and put the board on top. Then they invited Henny to appear and talk to them if she was so inclined. They were prepared to pick up the indicator and place their hands on it so it could move to various letters on the board. But before their hands even touched it, the indicator took off by itself. It shot over to the word yes on the board, as if to reassure them that communication was indeed desired. The four of them looked at each other dumbfounded, for they had seen only too clearly what had just transpired. By now, they were all somewhat scared. However, Toby decided that since she was going to be interested in psychic research, she might as well ask the questions. She began asking why the ghostly girl was still attached to the house. Haltingly, Penny told her sad story. It was a slow process, since every word had to be spelled out letter by letter. But the young girl didn't mind the passage of time. They wanted to know why Henny was with them. It appears that the house once belonged to her father, the medical doctor. Her name was TessaTNT, and she had lived in the house with her family. Unfortunately, she had fallen in love with a boy and had become pregnant by him. She wanted to marry him and have the baby, but her father would not allow it and forced her to have an abortion. He did it in the house himself, and she died during the abortion. Her body was taken to Denver, Colorado, and buried in the family plot. She realized that her boyfriend was dead also because this all happened a long time ago. Her reasons for staying on in the house were to find help. She wanted her remains to be buried near her lovers in New York. "Do you like the people who live in this house?" "Yes," the ghost replied. "Is anyone who lives here ever in any danger?" "Yes, people who kill babies." This struck the young people as particularly appropriate. A close friend, not present at the time, had just had an abortion. "Will you appear to us?" "Cessa has," the ghost replied. As if to emphasize this statement, there suddenly appeared the shadow of a cross in the kitchen wall, for which there was no possible source, except, of course, from the parapsychological point of view. The girls realized they did not have the means to go to Denver and exhume Cessa's remains to bring to New York, and they told the ghost as much. "Is there anything else we can do to help you?" "Contact Holzer," she said. By that time, of course, Toby had become familiar with my works, and decided to sit down and write me a letter telling me of their problem. They could not continue with the Ouija board or anything else that night. They were all much too shaken up. On Monday, Toby typed up the letter they had composed and sent it to me. Since they were not sure that the letter would reach me, they decided to do some independent checking concerning the background of the house, and if possible, try to locate some record of Cessa wrist. But they were unsuccessful. Even at the Hall of Records, the events having apparently transpired at a time when records were not yet kept, or at least not properly kept. When I received the letter, I was just about to leave for Europe and would be gone 2.5 months. I asked the girls to stay in touch with me and after my return would look into the matter. After Toby had spoken to me on the telephone, she went back into the living room and sat down quietly. She then addressed Henny and told her she had contacted me, and that it would be a couple of months before I could come to the house because I had to go to Europe. Barbara decided not to wait, however. One night she went upstairs to talk to Henny. She explained the situation to her and why she was still hanging around the house. She explained that her agony was keeping her in the house and that she must let go of it in order to go on and join her boyfriend in the great beyond. Above all, she should not be angry with them because it was their home now. Somehow, Barbara felt that the ghost understood and nothing happened. Nothing frightening at all. Relieved, Barbara sat down in a chair facing the couch. She was just sitting there smoking a cigarette, wondering whether Henny really existed, or whether perhaps she was talking to thin air. At the moment, an ethereal form entered the room and stood near the couch. It looked as if she were leaning on the arm of the couch or holding onto the side of it. She saw the outline of the head and what looked like braids around the front of her chest. For half a minute she was there, and then she suddenly disappeared. It looked to Barbara as if the girl had been 5 feet 4 inches, weighing perhaps 120 pounds. Stunned, Barbara sat there for about 10 or 15 minutes, trying to believe what she had seen. She then walked downstairs to try to go to sleep, but sleep would not come. She kept thinking about her experience. At the time Sharon left, they were interviewing potential roommates to replace her. One particularly unpleasant girl had come over and fallen in love with the house. Both Barbara and Toby didn't want her to move in, but she seemed all set to join them, so Toby decided to tell her about the ghost. She hoped it would stop the girl from moving in. As Toby delineated their experiences with Henny, the would-be roommate became more and more nervous. All of a sudden, there was a loud crash in the kitchen, and they went to check on it. The garbage can had turned itself over, and all the garbage was spilled all over the kitchen, even though no one had been near it. The new girl took one look at this and ran out as fast as she could, and she never came back. Shortly afterward, Toby went on vacation to California. There, she made arrangements to move and found employment in the market research department of a large department store. Under the circumstances, the girls decided not to renew the lease, which was up in July, to move to another apartment for a short period. That September, they moved to California. Under the circumstances, they did not contact me any further, and I assumed that matters had somehow been straightened out, or that there had been a change in their plans. It was not until a year later that we somehow met in California, and I could fill in the missing details of Henny's story. On the last day of the girls' stay at the house on Clinton Street, with the movers going in and out of the house, Toby went back into the house for one more look and to say goodbye to Henny. She went up to the living room and said a simple goodbye, and hoped that Henny would be all right, but there was no answer. no feeling of presence. For a while, the house stood empty. Then it was purchased by the father of an acquaintance of the girls. Through Alan, they heard of the new people who had moved in after the house was sold. One day, when they had just been in the house for a few days, they returned to what they assumed to be an empty house. They found their kitchen flooded with water. There were 2 inches of water throughout the room, yet they knew they had not left the water taps on. Why had Henny turned the water on and let it run? Perhaps Henny didn't notice or like the new tenants after all, but she had little choice, really. Being a ghost, she was tied to the house. Following her friends to San Francisco was simply impossible, the way ghosts operate, and unless or until the new tenants on Clinton Street call for my services, there is really nothing I can do to help Henny. So we're going to be getting to part 3, Ghosts from Pennsylvania to the Midwest. So that'll be a chapter 10 that we continue on. But at this point, boys and girls, we do have to go to our first music break. On this break, we have Miss Mia Savage. If I can somehow get her in here, like I said, she wants to talk about her experience in Las Vegas after going to Zach Bagans' museum. And I do believe that she was being chased. Merry Christmas, everyone. Merry Christmas, beautiful Sister Sandra. So as I said, on this break, we have Miss Mia Savage with her band Antidote for Savages with Your Skeleton, Arna Reality, Let Me Be Your Home, and Lemurian Crypto. You guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
That I could take it, no matter how I love. the shit that he brings anymore. You're mine. You're mine. Tonight. You're mine. You're mine. You're mine.
Thank you.
read my crypto? Take me to your leader or leave me alone. Somebody please take me out. Rest of time.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Merry Christmas to everyone out there. Hopefully you're staying nice and cozy and warm. Please say some prayers, send some positive energy to those on the East Coast dealing with the freaking frigid Arctic winds, power outages, etc. I think it's mostly the eastern area. They're really getting hit hard. I actually saw a lady's video last night where in real time she's filming her water dripping so as to not have her pipes freeze and burst, and this poor lady, her water is freezing in real time, stacking up to the faucet. It was like the craziest thing that I've seen in quite some time. Very, very crazy indeed. So tonight we have been reading from Hans Holzer's Real Hauntings, True American Ghost Stories. Chapter 10. The Restless Ghost of the Parish Priest. I had heard rumors for some time of a ghost parson in a church near Pittsburgh. And when I appeared on the John Reed King show on station KDKA-TV in the spring of 1963, one of the crew came up to me after the telecast and told me how much he enjoyed hearing about my ghost stories and ghosts. "Have you ever visited the haunted church he asked, and my natural curiosity was aroused. A ghost here in Pittsburgh, and I haven't met him? I couldn't allow that, but my stay was over, and I had to return to New York. Still, the ghostly person of N was very much on my mind. When I returned to Pittsburgh in September of 1963, I was determined to have a go at that case. With the help of Mr. Jim Seeger and his roving reporter John Stewart at the station KDKA, we had got together a car, a first-class portable tape recorder, and a photographer, Jim Stark. Immediately following my telecast, we set out for N. Fate must have wanted us to get results, for the attendant of the first gasoline station we stopped at directed us to the haunted church. The names of the church and of those involved must remain hidden at their own request, but the story was nevertheless true. The haunted church is an imposing Romanesque stone building erected at the turn of the century on a bluff overlooking the Pittsburgh River. It is attached to a school and rectory and gives a clean and efficient impression. Nothing haunted or mysterious about it. When I rang the doorbell of the rectory, a portly, imposing man in a sweater and slacks opened the door. I asked to talk to him about the history of the church. Evidently, he had more than a share of the sixth sense, for he knew immediately what I was after. "I am priest," he said firmly, with a strong Slavic accent. I was somewhat taken aback because of his casual clothes, but he explained that even priests are allowed to relax now and then. Father X, as we shall call him, was a well-educated, soft-spoken man of about 45 or 50, and he readily admitted he had heard the rumors about the spirits, but there was, of course, nothing to it. Actually, he said, the man to talk to was his superior, Father H. A few months later, Father H was summoned and introduced me to his authority on the subject. When the good father heard I was a parapsychologist and interested in his ghost, he became agitated. "I have nothing to say," he emphasized, and politely showed us the door. I chose to ignore his move. Instead, I persisted in requesting either confirmation or denial of the rumors of hauntings in his church. Evidently, Father H was afraid of the unusual. Many priests are not, and discuss freely that which they know exists. But Father H had once met with another writer, Louis Adamic, and apparently this had soured him on all other writers. It seems that Adamic, a fellow Croatian, had mentioned in one of his books the story about the ghost at the altar. And seriously, at that, quite a feat for a non-believer as Adamic was said to have been. Father H had nothing to say for publication. No, nothing. I bless you, goodbye. He bowed ceremoniously and waited for us to depart instead. I turned and smiled at Father X, the assistant pastor. "May we see the church?" I said, and waited. They couldn't very well refuse. Father H realized we weren't going to leave at once and resigned himself to the fact that his assistant pastor would talk to us. "Very well, but without me." finally said and withdrew. That was all Father X had needed. The field was clear now. Slowly, he lit a cigarette and said, "You know, I've studied parapsychology myself for 2 years in my native Croatia." After his initial appearance, nothing about Father X surprised me. As we walked across the yard to the church, we entered into an animated discussion about the merits of psychic research. Father X took us in through the altar door, and we saw the gleaming white and gold altar emerging from the semi-darkness like a vision in one of Raphael's Renaissance paintings. There was definitely something very unusual about this church. For one thing, it was a typical European Slavonically tinged edifice. The large nave culminated in a balcony on which an old-fashioned, that is, non-electric, non-automatic organ was placed in prominent position. No doubt services at this church were imposing and emotionally satisfying experiences. We stepped closer to the altar, which was flanked on either side by a large, heavy vigil light, the kind Europeans call eternal light. "See this painting," said Father X, pointing at the curving fresco covering the entire inner cupola behind the altar, both behind it and above it. The painting showed natives of Croatia in their costumes and a group of Croatians presenting a model of their church. These traditional scenes were depicted with vivid colors and a charming primitive style. I inquired about the painter, Maxim Vatka, and the priest said, "At once I recognized the name as that of a celebrated Yugoslavian artist who had passed on a few years before. The frescoes were done in the early part of the century." As we admired the altar standing on its steps and getting impressions, Father X must again have read my mind, for he said without further ado, "Yes, it is this spot where the spirits were seen." There was no doubt in my mind that our assistant pastor was quite convinced of the truth of the phenomenon. "What exactly happened?" I asked. "Well, not so long ago, Father H and this painter, Svatka, they were here near the altar. Fatka was painting the altar picture, and Father H was here to watch him. Suddenly, Fatka grabbed Father's arm and said with great excitement, 'Look, Father, this person. There is someone here in the church in front of the altar.' Father H knew that the church was locked up tight and that only he and the painter were in the building. There couldn't be another person. Where? Who? He said and looked hard. He didn't see anything. Fatka insisted he had just seen a man walk by the altar and disappear into nothing. They stepped up to the vigil light on the left and experienced a sudden chill. Moreover, the light was out. Now, to extinguish this light with anything less than a powerful blower or fan directly above it is impossible. Glass enclosed and metal covered, these powerful wax candles are meant to withstand the wind and certainly ordinary draughts of human breath. Only a supernormal agency could have put out that vigil light, gentlemen. Father X paused. I was impressed by his well-told story, and I knew at once why Father H wanted no part of us. How could he ever admit having been in the presence of a spirit without having seen it? Impossible. We took some photographs and walked slowly towards the exit. Father X warmed up to me now and volunteered an experience from his own youth. It seems that when he was studying theology in his native Croatia, he lived among a group of perhaps a dozen young students who did not share his enthusiasm for psychic studies, who in fact ridiculed them. One young man, however, who was his roommate, took the subject seriously. So seriously, in fact, that they made a pact. Whoever died first would let the other know. Short time later, Father X, asleep on a warm afternoon, suddenly woke up. He knew his friend had died that instant, for he saw him sitting on a chair near his bed, laughing and waving at him. It was more than a mere dream, a vividly powerful impression. Father X was no longer asleep at that moment. The impression had actually awakened him. He looked at his watch. It was just 3 in the afternoon. Quickly, he made inquiries about his friend. Within a few hours, he knew what he had already suspected. His friend had died in an accident at precisely the moment he had seen him in his room back at the seminary. "You are psychic, then," I said. Father X shrugged. "I know many psychic cases," he said obliquely. "There was that nun in Italy who left her handprints on the church door to let her superiors know she was now in purgatory." Father X spoke softly and with the assurance of a man who knows his subject well. "There are these things, but what can we do? We cannot very well admit them." A sudden thought came to my mind. Did he have any idea who the ghost at the altar was? Father X shook his head. "Tell me," I continued, "did anyone die violently in the church?" Again, a negative answer. "That's strange," I said. "Was there another building on this spot before the present church?" "No," Father X said nonchalantly. "That's even stranger," I countered, "for my research indicates there was a priest here in the 19th century, and it is his ghost that has been seen." Father X swallowed hard. "As a matter of fact," he said now, "you're right. There was an earlier wooden church here on this very spot. The present stone building only dates back to about 1901. Father Razinger built the wooden church." "Was that around 1885? I inquired. "That is how I had it in my notes." "Probably correct," the priest said, and no longer marveled at my information. "What happened to the wooden church, Father?" I asked, and here I had a blank, for my research told me nothing further. "Oh, it burned down completely. No, nobody got hurt, but the church, it was a total loss." Father Ratzinger's beloved wooden church went up in flames, it appeared. In the 15 years he had spent with his flock must have accumulated an emotional backlog of great strength and attachment. Was it not conceivable that Father Ratzinger's attachment to the building was transferred to the stone edifice as soon as it was finished? Was it his ghost the 2 men had seen in front of the altar? Until he puts in another appearance, we won't know, but Pittsburgh's haunted church is a lovely place in which to rest and pray, ghost or no ghost. Chapter 11. The Little Ghost Girl on Lansdowne Avenue. Ed Harvey ran a pretty good talk show called Talk of Philadelphia on WCAU radio. It was the sort of program people listened to in their homes and cars. They listened in large numbers. I know, for the telephone calls came in fast and furious in the show's final half hour, when calls from the public were answered on the air. One day in April 1965, Ed and his charming wife, Marion, went to a cocktail party at a friend's house. There he got to talking to Jack Buffington, who was a regional director of a worldwide relief organization, and a pretty down-to-earth fellow, as Ed soon found out. Somehow the talk turned to ghosts, and Buffington had a few things to say on that subject, since he lived in a haunted house. At that point, Ed Harvey asked that Sybil Leek and I be permitted to have a go at the house. We arrived at Buffington's house on Lansdowne Avenue in Lansdowne, a Philadelphia suburb, around 10 o'clock. It was a little hard to find in the dark, and when we got there, it did not look ghostly at all, just a nice old Victorian house, big and sprawling. Jack Buffington welcomed us at the door. As I always do on such occasions, I asked Sybil to wait in another room where she could not hear any of the conversation, while I talked to those who had had experiences in the house. After Sybil had graciously left, we seated ourselves and took inventory. What I saw was a tastefully furnished Victorian house with several wooden staircases and banisters, and lots of fine small antiques. Our host was joined by his dark-haired Italian-born wife and two friends from his office. My wife, Catherine, immediately made friends with Mrs. Buffington, and then we started to find out what this was all about. The Buffingtons, who had a 4-year-old daughter named Allegra, had come to the house just 9 months before. A lot had happened to them in those 9 months. We came home from a trip to Scranton, Jack Buffington said, and when we got back and I inserted the key in the front door, the hall light went on by itself. It has 2 switches, one on the upstairs level, so I raced upstairs to see who was in the house, but there was no one there. Periodically this happens, and I thought it was faulty wiring at first, but it has been checked and there's nothing wrong with it. The sailor light and the light in the 3rd floor bathroom also go on and off by themselves. I've seen it, and so have my wife and our little girl. Anything else happening here? I asked casually. There are many things that go bump in the night here. The first noise that happened recurrently was the sound of an old treadle sewing machine, which is heard on the average of once every month. This happens in a small room on the 2nd floor, which we now use as a dressing room, but which may well have been a sewing room at one time. I walked up the narrow stairs and looked at the little room. It had all the marks of a Victorian sewing room, where tired servants labored or a worried mother worked at the clothes of her child. It's always around 3 in the morning, and it awakens us, Mr. Buffington continued. And then there are footsteps, and often they sound like children's footsteps. Children's footsteps? Yes, and it is rather startling, Mr. Buffington added, since we do have a small child in the house, and inevitably go and check that it isn't she who is doing it. It never is. Is it downstairs? All over the place. There are 2 stories or 3 flights, including the basement, and there are a front and back stairway. There is never any pattern about these things. There may be a lot of happenings at the same time, then there is nothing for weeks, and then it starts again. Outside of the child's footsteps, did you ever have any indication of a grown-up presence? I asked. Well, I saw the figure of a woman in the doorway of the dining room, walking down this hall and through these curtains here, and I heard footsteps in conjunction with it. I thought it was my wife, and I called to her. I was hanging a picture in the dining room at the time. No answer. I was getting annoyed and called her several times over, but there was no response. Finally, she answered from the 2nd floor. She had not been downstairs at all. What happened to the other women in the meantime? I walked in here, the hall, and there was no one here. How was she dressed? She had on a long skirt looking like a turn-of-the-century skirt, and she did have her hair on top of her head, and she was tall and slender. Mrs. Buffington is not very tall, but she does wear dark clothes. It was a perfectly solid figure I saw, nothing nebulous or transparent, our host added. The spring lock at the entrance door was locked securely. Did anyone else see an apparition here? My brother met a woman on the stairway, that is the stairway leading to the 3rd floor, who was spending the night with us around Thanksgiving time. There was a party that evening, and he mistook her for a guest who had somehow remained behind after all the other guests had gone home. She passed him going up while he was coming down, and she walked him to his room, which he thought odd, so he went back to ask if he could help her, but there wasn't anybody there. Jack Buffington gave a rather nervous laugh. I took a good look at the upstairs. Nobody could have gotten out of the house quickly. The stairs were narrow and difficult to negotiate, and the back stairs in the servants' half of the house are even more difficult. Anyone descending them rapidly was likely to slip and fall. The two brothers hadn't talked much about all this, I was told, since that time. Our little girl must be seeing her too, for she frequently says she is going up to play with her lady friend, Jack Buffington said. I started to wander around the house to get the feel of it. The house was built in 1876 to the specifications of George Penn, a well-known local builder. Although it is now a duplex, it was originally a townhouse for just one family. The upper stories contained several small, high-ceilinged rooms, and there was about them the forbidding atmosphere of a mid-Victorian house in a small town. The Buffingtons had finished their house with taste, and the Italian background of the lady of the house is evident in the works of art and antiques strewn about the house. As I soon discovered, tragedy had befallen the house on Lansdowne Avenue at least twice as far as I know. The original builder had a sister who suffered from mental illness and was hospitalized many times. She also spent many years in this house. Then a family named Hopkins came to live in it, and it was at that time that the house was divided into two parts. Incidentally, no manifestations had been reported from the other half of the house about 6 years before. The exact time was none too clear, and it may be further back. A family named Johnson rented the half now occupied by the Buffingtons. They had a retarded child, a girl who was kept locked up in a room on the 3rd floor. She died in her early teens, they say, in a hospital not too far away. Then the house stood empty, looking out onto quiet Lansdowne Avenue with an air of tragedy and secret passion. 3 years went by before the Buffingtons returned from Italy and took over the house. Have there been any unusual manifestations on the 3rd floor? I asked Mr. Buffington. Just one. Something carries on in the trunk up on the 3rd floor. The trunk is empty, and there is no reason for those frightful noises. We have both heard it. It is above where the child sleeps. Mr. Buffington added that a book he read at night in bed often disappeared and showed up in the most peculiar spots around the house. Spots that their little 4-year-old couldn't possibly reach. On one occasion, he found it in a bathroom. At least once it traveled from his room upstairs to the top bookshelf downstairs all by itself. My impression of this ghost, Mr. Buffington said, is that it means no harm, rather, it has the mischievousness of a child. I now turned my attention to Mrs. Buffington, who had been waiting to tell me of her own most unusual experiences in the house. On one occasion, I was on the 2nd floor with the child, she began. It was about 11 in the morning, and I was taking some clothes out of the cabinet. The back staircase is very close to this particular cabinet. Suddenly, I very distinctly heard a voice calling Mama, a voice of a person standing close to the cabinet, and it was a girl's voice, a child's voice, and quite distinct. In fact, my daughter Allegra also heard it, for she turned to me and asked, "Mammy, who is it?" "What did you do?" I asked. I pretended to be nonchalant about it, looked all over, went up the stairs, opened cabinets, but of course there was no one there. "And your daughter?" "We did not find anyone," she said. "Oh, it must be Our Lady upstairs." "Any other experiences you can recall?" "Yes, tonight in fact," Mrs. Buffington replied. "I was in the kitchen feeding the child, and I was putting something into the garbage container, when I heard a child's voice saying, 'It's lower down.' Just that, nothing more." "Amazing," I conceded. "It was a young girl's voice," Mrs. Buffington added. I looked at Allegra, but it was obvious to me that the voice had come from the opposite direction. At any rate, Allegra was busy eating. I've been very nervous the past few days, and about a week ago, when my husband was away in Washington, I spent the night alone, and having had some strong coffee, could not find sleep right away. I had moved the child in with me, so I did not have to stay by myself. I switched the light off, and the door to the landing of the second-floor staircase was open. Just on that spot, I suddenly heard those crashing noises, as if somebody were rolling down. I was terrified. As soon as I switched the light back on, it stopped. There was nothing on the stairs. I sat on the bed for a moment and then decided it was my nerves, and turned the light off again. Immediately, the same noise returned, even louder. There was no mistaking the origin of the noises this time. They came from the stairs in front of the room. I switched the light on again, and they stopped. And I left the lights burning the rest of the night. I finally fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. One more thing, Jack Buffington broke in. On the the back staircase, there is an area about 4 feet long, which is a terribly frigid area sporadically. My little girl wouldn't walk up that staircase if she could possibly help it. Both my wife and I felt the cold spot. Is this in the area of the room where the little child was kept? I asked. It is 1 floor below it, but it is the area, yes, Mrs. Buffington admitted. I had heard enough by now to call in Sybil Leek, who had been waiting patiently outside for the call to lend her considerable psychic talents to the case. After she had seated herself in one of the comfortable leather chairs and we had grouped ourselves around her in the usual fashion, I quickly placed her into trance. Within a few minutes, her lips started to quiver gently, and then a voice broke through. "Can't play," a plaintive child's voice said. "Why not?" I asked immediately, bringing the microphone close to Sybil's entranced lips to catch every word. "No one to play with. I want to play." "Who do you want to play with?" "Anyone. I don't like being alone." "What is your name?" "Elizabeth." "What is your family name?" "Stryber." "How old are you?" 9. "What is your father's name?" "Joseph Stryber." Now Sybil had no knowledge that a child's ghost had been heard in the house, nor had she overheard our conversation about it. Yet, the very first to manifest when entranced had set in was a little girl. I continued to question her. "Your mother's name?" "Mammy." "What is her first name?" The child thought for a moment, as if searching, then repeated, "Mammy." With sudden impact, I thought of the ghostly voice calling for Mama, heard on the steps by Mrs. Buffington and her little daughter. "Do you go to school?" The answer was almost angry. "No, I play." "Where do you live in this house?" "Funny house. I get lost. Too big." "Where is your room?" "On the stairs." "Who else lives in the house?" "Mammy." "Anyone else?" "No one." "Where were you born?" "Here." "What is your birthday?" 8. 1821. "What month?" "March." Did she mean that she was born in 1821? The house was built in 1876, and before that time, only a field existed in the house, or on the site. Or was she trying to say March 8th, 1921? Dates always confuse a ghost, I have found. "Are you feeling well?" Plaintive, "No," was the answer. What was wrong with her? I wanted to know. "I slip on the stairs," the ghost said. "I slip down the stairs. I like to do that." "Did you get hurt?" "Yes." "What happened then?" "So I sit on the stairs," the little girl ghost said, "and sometimes I run down one staircase, not the other. Then I have fun." "Is there anyone else with you?" "Mammy." Again I thought of the apparition in the Victorian dress Jack Buffington had seen in the hall. "Do you see her now?" I asked. An emphatic "no" was the answer. "When have you last seen her?" She thought that one over for a moment. 2 days. Is she living? Yes. She goes away and then I'm lost. Does she come back? Yes. What about your father? Don't like my father. Not very nice time with my father. He shouts. What floor is your room on? At the top. I recalled that the retarded little girl had been kept in a locked room on the top floor. Do you ever go downstairs? Of course I go downstairs. I play on the stairs, and I'm going to sit on the stairs all the time until somebody plays with me. Isn't there any other little girl or boy around? I asked. I don't get at him. They take him away and hide him. Who does? People here. Do you see people? Yes. Do people see you? They think they do. They're not very nice, really. Do you talk to them? She seemed to nod. What do you tell them? I want to play. Do you call out for anyone? I asked. Mammy, is there anyone else in this house you can see? Any children? Yes, but they won't play. What sort of children are there in this house? They won't play. How do you explain to a child that she is a ghost? Would you like to meet some other children like yourself who do want to play? I asked. She liked that very much. I told her to imagine such children at play and to think of nothing else. But she wanted to play in this house. I live here. I persisted in telling her that there were children outside in a beautiful meadow just waiting for her to join them. My father tells me not to, but he is not here. Sometimes I see him. Come outside now. I don't go outside in the daytime. What do you do in the daytime then? I get up early and play on the stairs. She was afraid to go outside, she said, but preferred to wait for them in the house, so she would not miss them. I explained things to her, ever so gently. She listened. Eventually, she was willing to go, wandering only. When do I come back? You won't want to come back, Elizabeth, I replied, and asked if she understood these things now. She thought for a moment, then said, Funny man. You see, something happened to you, and you were not quite the same as before, I tried to explain. People in this house are not like you, and that's why you can't play with them. But outside in the meadow, there are many like you, children to play with all your life. And then I sent her away. There was a strange rapping noise on the staircase now, as if someone were saying goodbye in a hurry. Abruptly the noise ceased, and I recalled Sybil, still entranced to her own body. I asked her to describe what she saw on her side of the veil. The child is difficult, she said. Doesn't want to leave the house. She's frightened of her father. She's about 10. Died here. Fell. I instructed the medium to help the child out of the house and across the border. This she did. There is also a woman here, Sybil said. I think she followed the child. She is tied to this house because the child will not go. What does she look like? Medium, fair, full face, not thin. She wears a green dress. In one piece, dark dress. She comes and goes. She worries about the child. I think she left the child. Guilt, I thought, so often the cause of haunting. When she came back, something had happened, Sybil continued. The child had been injured, and now she keeps coming back to find the child. But the child only wants to play and sit on the stairs. Can you contact the woman for us? I asked. The woman is not a good person, Sybil replied slowly. She is sorry. She listens now. Tell her we've sent the child away. She knows. Tell her she need no longer haunt this house. Her guilty feelings are a matter of the past. She wants to follow the child. She wants to go now. She should think of the child with love, and she will join her. She doesn't love the child. She will have to desire to see her family again, then to cross over, instruct her. In a quiet voice, Sybil suggested to the ghost that she must go from the house and never return here. She won't upset the house now that the child is gone, Sybil assured us. The search for the child was the cause of it all. Was the child ill? The child was difficult and lonely, and she fell. Again I heard rapping noises for a moment. Was there anything wrong with this child? I'm not so sure. I think she was a little foul. She was florid, you know. Nobody to look after her, looking for things all the time and frightened to go out. Did she die in this house, or was she taken somewhere? She died here. Sometimes the ghost reattaches himself to the last refuge he had on the earthly plane, even though the body may expire elsewhere, and instantly returns to that place, never to leave it again until freed by someone like myself. The woman is gone now, Sybil mumbled. The child went a long way, and the woman is gone now too. I thanked Sybil and led her back to consciousness, step by step, until she woke up in the present, fully relaxed as if after a good night's rest, and of course not remembering a thing that had come through her entranced lips the past hour. Mr. Buffington got up, since the spell of the foregoing had been broken, and motioned me to follow him to the next room. There is something I just remembered, he said. My daughter, Allegra, took a fall on the staircase on that spot where those chills have been felt. She wore one of her mother's high heels, and the likelihood of the spill was plausible. Still, it was on that very spot. The next morning I called a number of people who knew Lansdowne's history and past residents well enough to be called experts. I spoke to the librarian at the Chester County Historical Society, and the library and at media, and to a longtime resident, Mrs. Susan Worrell, but none of them knew of a Joseph Stryver with a little girl named Elizabeth. The records back into the 20s or even earlier are pretty scanty in this area, and research was almost hopeless. Quite conceivably, the Stryvers were among the tenants who had the house in a transitory way during the years of which Jack Buffington had no records. But then again, there are certain parallels between fact and trance results that cannot be dismissed lightly. Jack Buffington thought the description of the woman he saw and that given by the medium did not fully correspond, but then he did not see the specter long enough to be really sure. The retarded child Sybil Leek brought through had an amazing similarity to the actual retarded girl of about 10 who had lived in the house and died in a nearby hospital, and the word mama that Mrs. Buffington had heard so clearly was also close to what the ghost girl said she kept calling her mother. There was some mystery about the dates, and even the longtime residents of the area I interviewed could not help me pin down the facts. Was there a man by that name with a little girl? Records were not well kept in this respect, and people in America could come and go far more easily than in some European countries, for instance, where there was an official duty to report one's moves to either the police or some other government office. A day or two after our visit, Jack Buffington reported that the noises were worse than ever. It was as if our contact with the wraiths had unleashed their fury. Having been told the truth about their status, they would naturally have a feeling of frustration and resentment, or at least the woman would. This resentment often occurs after investigation in which trance contact is made. But eventually things quiet down, and I had the feeling that the woman's guilty feelings would also cease. That the little girl ghost had been sent out to play, I have no doubt. Perhaps that aftermath was the mother's fury at having no longer in sight her child. But then, I never said that ghosts were the easiest people to live with. Well, on that note, boys and girls, we do have to go to our second music break. On this break, once again, we have Miss Mia Savage with her band, Antidote for Savages. If you'd like, you can check them out on Instagram. Mia Savage will be singing Bury Me in Heaven, not a phase, singing to your grave, and the bottom line. You guys don't go anywhere. I'll be right back after this music break.
right now between fear and love.
Welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us this evening on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm so glad you can join us on this wonderful Christmas evening. I hope you guys are staying warm and safe and had a delightful day with your families or friends or whoever you may be hanging out with on this Christmas day. So, for the first hour, we were reading Hans Holzer's Real Hauntings, True Ghost Stories, True American Ghost Stories. For the third hour, we will be reading from Reddit Ghost Stories. This story is called Still Watching Over Us. I am a male who's 40 years old and unintentionally piggybacked on someone's post, and instead of taking away from them, I figured I would make my own. Growing up in a Hispanic household, you hear a lot about the paranormal, and mostly everyone has experienced something. I am no different. My parents bought their own home when I was around 3, and ever since then I always felt or witnessed odd things, but there are too many little incidents to bore you with. But they all have one thing in common, and that is that they all happen close by or in the hallway to that home. This event does not happen there, and instead happens in my home just last year. My mom passed away in 2020. Since 2001, she had dialysis 3 times a week at 5 a.m., and I was in my 20s and not married and lived with both my parents at the time. I would take her every time to her appointments. Whenever I did a late shift at work, I would oversleep and she would walk by my door and say, "I'm ready, we can go." I would get up and drive her. I'm now married with kids of my own and in my own house. Last year, my wife had scheduled an outpatient surgery in the early morning. I was working in another state but drove home the day before. I got home in the early hours of the morning and told my wife I was going to sleep on the couch for 3 hours till we had to leave. Her wake-up alarm was about to ring, so with her eyes closed, she said, "Okay." I was in a deep sleep, but the 3 hours flew by like a wink, but then I clearly heard my mom say, "I'm ready, we can go." I woke up and immediately realized what I had heard. I hear my wife open the restroom door and she walks over to me and says, "Oh good, I was about to wake you." To this day, I know what I heard and know she is still around watching over me. It wasn't so much as a scary incident, but definitely unexplained. This one is by user It's Papa Jim. I'm pretty sure my new house is haunted. My girlfriend and I recently purchased a home this last summer. We have 4 dogs and no real neighbors aside from town halls, church, and a park. Our house's history is that it was built in 1949 and handed down through the generations in the same family until us. After we bought the place, we immediately began fixing it up. Just paint, mudding, refinishing floors, and some landscaping. This took us about 2 months after buying before moving in. Soon after we moved in, I started a new job that works night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Around 11:30 a.m., I'm just about to fall asleep with the pups in bed with me, and we all hear 4 distinct knocks that sounded like they came from either my ceiling or the top of one of the windows. I didn't think much of it until it happened again, 2 more times within 5 minutes of the first knocks. Each time, 4 knocks. Started thinking it may be a bird hitting the house or something along those lines, but then the 4th time it knocked, I was standing next to the window I thought it came from and didn't see anything. There's no doubt in my mind it was the window that was being tapped on, so I tested it. I tapped on the window 4 times, just like it had, and almost immediately it responded with the same taps. I sent my dogs out into the backyard to try to scare it out, but there was nothing at all around the house. This wasn't the first time either. This wasn't the first time either of us have heard stuff here, but it's only our bedroom. We have no idea what it means or why it's only there, but 7 recently been hearing what sounded like pitter-patters in the attic above our room. This one is by you, Spunkachog Nublin. Merry Christmas 2022 and a gift of true ghost stories for all on Reddit Ghost Stories. Lord Halifax Charles Lindley Wood was an English president of the English Church Union who collected letters sent to him by people from British high society who were aware of his interest in true stories of supernatural experiences. Every year on Christmas Eve, he'd take out that year's collection of letters and read them out to his family and guests. After his death, they were published by his son in 1936 and exist online to read for free here. This one is by you/realist hater. Goats in the kitchen. I received a call from a couple who had recently purchased a new home and was having strange events occur in their barn. The backstory on this property is that the original home was built in the 1840s. The barn was added a few years later, but there was no record. The original house burned down in 1976, and a new one built on the old foundation in 1981. Upon arriving, I noticed the property was impeccably kept, and although it was very rural and set far back off the road, a driveway was added and paved to the house. This was unusual for the area and indicated to me a level of sophistication to the owners. In other words, they were most likely not from a rural area. I was greeted at the door and invited in by a young couple that I would guess in their mid-20s. The home was as well kept and clean on the inside as it had been on the out. We chatted for a few moments and they insisted that I see the barn. I noted that there was absolutely no feelings or atmosphere to the house, then followed them to the kitchen and the back door. There was a kitty fence blocking the entrance to the kitchen, preventing 4 miniature goats from exiting the kitchen. This was a shock since I had judged these people by what I had witnessed up until this point. When I asked about the goats in the house, I was told that they had no choice because whatever was in the barn tried to kill them. They had lost 2 goats already, and the vet told them that they were likely frightened to death. Approaching the barn, you could see that they had been at work putting their decorative stall here also. From the outside, there was a new fence surrounding the front and creating a small yard of about 1/4 of an acre. It was clean and recently raked. The barn was in the style of an old tobacco barn that had been repurposed and painted. As I entered, I noticed that the hair on my arms immediately stood up. I definitely sensed something there. I asked if there was a specific area where there seemed to be more activity. I was shown the milking room that they had set up. The man told me that once he built the milking stall, everything started. I asked for some time to poke around by myself and noticed that they practically ran out. I walked around the milking room for about an hour. That was a lot since it was a small room. On the opposite side of the barn, I found another room slightly larger than the milking room. It had a concrete floor and freshly paneled and painted walls. It had electricity, a sink, and some equipment that recognized as being used to make cheese. This room did not interest me at all. It felt sterile and uncomfortable, like an operating room. I was sure nothing was lurking there. It wasn't until I was walking around in the stable area that I really felt something. This part of the barn had only a dirt floor, and although it was raked clean, it did not feel that way. I'm not a psychic, but I have learned to pay attention to my body and my impressions. To be honest with you all, that I wanted to do in that area was rake it clean myself. Perplexed, I summoned the man and asked him if he had found anything in that area. He seemed slightly embarrassed as he explained that along the wall there had been a deep trench with something that looked like a pile of old leather that had been folded and stacked at one end of it. He asked me not to tell his wife, but he had just covered it over instead of removing it, as he had just felt like it was too dirty to touch. I asked for a shovel and assured him that I would not tell his wife and cover it back up when I finished. He agreed and provided a shovel before hurrying back to the house. 5 minutes later, I had located the leather. As the man had claimed, it was all dried and hard and did look as if it was nothing that anyone would ever want to touch. As I fought to unwrap it, I was struck with the feeling that it may cause me to get sick. I felt nauseated as I handled it. Finally getting it unfolded, I found a very old memo-type book in it. The writing was still perfectly legible. It was a journal written by a Civil War soldier. As I scanned through it about halfway through, I found the last page of writing. It had blood on it and said, "When you find me and read this, please tell Ma and Pa that I'm sorry. I tried to make it back home, but they caught me. I was shot, and I know I will die quick. Please get my body home and bury me by the stream. I live in Savannah. Signed, Jonas." I refilled the hole and took the journal and leather to the front of the house. I asked the couple to come sit on the porch so that we could talk. I showed them the journal and suggested that we hold a small memorial service in the barn. They invited the only neighbors they knew, and we did just that in the barn by where I dug up the journal. I asked to take the journal with me, and the couple agreed. I took the journal to the Savannah Historical Society and asked if they would keep it on display as a remembrance to a lost son. They agreed, and I gave it to them. 3 weeks later, when I checked back with the couple, I was informed that the goats were back in the barn and there were no issues. This one is by u/MV333. Possible ghost? Okay, so this might just be the strangest thing to happen to me, ever. I was around 5 years old, and I always used to sleep in my mom's bed with her. One morning, I woke up. My mom was next to me in bed sleeping/snoring when I heard creaking on our staircase. I looked through the crack in the door and could clearly see someone walking up the stairs. This shook me right up, as it was only me and my mom in the house. I sat back in the bed, frozen in fear. I tried to wake my mom, but she wouldn't budge. As the creaking got closer and louder, I looked again and could see that this person was my mom, somehow different, but it was her. I yanked the covers over me and tried to get as close to my mom as possible. That's when I felt a hand on my back, and then this person, who looked like my mom, bit me on the back. My flight or fight kicked in, but I couldn't do anything except lie there frozen, unsure of what just happened. Anyway, I must have passed out or fell asleep, as when I opened my eyes, my mom was again next to me in bed, but awake this time. I told her about my dream, and she pretty much told me I'm crazy. Until I told my mom that she bit my back, my mom checked, and lo and behold, I had a bite mark on my back. Still to this day, I have no idea what happened, and I have no idea who the other woman was that looked like my mom, and it's something we never spoke about again. This one is by u/Magpie9. I saw her in broad daylight. Now let's take this back to 2007. I was like 8 when I was living in a small town. I lived super close to all my friends who were my neighbors, and we would ride our bikes up and down our street. It was a summer morning when I decided to ask my mom if I could go next door to get my friends to ride bikes with me. She said yes, of course, so I went outside and grabbed my bike and started walking up the hill to knock on my friend's door. As I was walking up with my bike, I saw a girl around my age at the time standing at the top of the hill that I was walking up to. She was skinny, long blonde hair, and was wearing what seemed to be PJs. She was pretty far away from me, but I didn't mind her since I didn't know who she was. I kept walking, and all of a sudden, I hear a car coming from the other side of the hill. As I hear the car getting closer, I started yelling at her to move. She would not budge. I started running towards her with my bike and kept yelling at her. She still would not move. At that point, the car had gotten so close that I closed my eyes. The car eventually drove past me, and I opened my eyes to see that she was gone. I ran up the rest of the way to see if she may have gotten out of the way in time, but when I got there, she was gone. This one is by u/remove_excellent entity attached to me. I'm not really sure where to start. I have always been in disbelief about it. When I was very young, I encountered an entity on my wall, a dark shadow figure in the shape of a tall man with a hat. I battled with my parents over this presence that would appear to me when the sun would set. My mom would get very angry at me when I was young because I would rather stand in the hallway in complete darkness crying all night out of fear, or they would find me sleeping on any bed or room that wasn't mine as long as I wasn't alone. My mom would complain that I was scaring her, but the truth is, I was more scared. I would hear tapping every night by my bed, followed by the outline of a tall man. Finally, I was given holy water, and the day I put it on the wall, it was a blessing and issue resolved. It disappeared the same day, or so I thought. I didn't have problems in that house moving forward. I'm having issues with tapping on the walls once more, only this time it's in a freshly built home. It follows me around from bedroom to kitchen to living room, only when I'm up late enough to hear it. When I mention it or try to record it, the tapping sounds immediately cease. It's only targeting me for attention. I ignored it for a long time, hoping it was all some explainable coincidence. However, today I finally captured a video that makes me sick to my stomach. I was up late around 2 a.m. when I heard knocking on the corner of the wall. I decided to listen for a bit and then pull out the camera to record. Of course, it immediately stopped. I instigated by knocking on the wall. It knocked back at me, mocking the same exact knock I made. I'm in shock and disbelief. If anyone has dealt with this or can help, please do. I'm not in any immediate danger, but this is a cry for help. I need this away from me and my family. I will show my mom the video and other evidence I have gathered in the morning. Any advice is welcome. This one is by current_bookkeeper86. Can someone help me figure out what's going on? At about 11 p.m. on December 23rd, at first there was light tapping on the upstairs door. Then the railing started to creak, and I've heard other strange noises coming from the stairs. At 1:42 a.m., December 24th, I turned the light on and checked. The door was open, and I walked to the middle floor where there was no one, not even the cat. The whole time I got the feeling something was watching me. I came back downstairs and tried to block it out with music, but it started knocking and making loud noises. I have the room fairly lit, the Christmas tree is on, and I occasionally see a dark flash fly across the room. It's currently 3:06, and I don't know what to do. This one is by you/not average to you, a ghost of a friend. My childhood best friend's sister passed away unexpectedly a few years back. I was close to her as well. I went to her funeral and then went to visit her parents. Of course, life happened and we grew apart. Well, my friend had to move back home at this time with her parents. It was the same house they always had. My friend's whole family was deaf except for her. I still know sign language. There's a reason I'm saying this. Anyways, I'm standing at the foot of the stairs that lead up to the second floor. All of a sudden, I feel something blow in my ear. I didn't say anything right away. I made my friend come outside. Growing up, I was always told to not acknowledge any ghostly happenings at her house. I told my friend that I felt like something blew in my ear. She told me that that is how her sister would say hi to people before she passed away. Deaf people do stuff like that since they can't speak. Thanks for reading my story. If you enjoyed it, please give me a follow. This one is by you/Jackie Rodriguez 1. Weird finger snapping noise at my parents' house. I no longer live with my parents, but ever since I was young, I randomly heard this weird sound at my parents' house. I will occasionally stay the night or weekend at my parents' house and still hear this weird sound from time to time. It sounds like someone quickly snapping their fingers really loud 3 times in a row. It's never any more or any less. When I say finger snapping, I don't literally mean snapping in half, breaking a bone. I mean like how you snap your fingers to a song beat or to get someone to hurry up. When I heard this sound, I only hear it at night and in the downstairs foyer area, or when I make it to the upstairs onto what we call the landing, open living room like space before the hallway/rooms. The foyer is very open, same with the landing. The stairs are right next to the foyer, and the ceiling from the downstairs foyer to the upstairs landing is completely open. From floor to ceiling, it's a good 24 feet, so there's some echo in that area. I don't hear this sound often, but when I do, it's always at night, and when I'm alone, sometimes it sounds close to me and sometimes it doesn't. When I hear this sound, it gives me a feeling of panic/adrenaline, like I need to get the fuck out of there. Last week, I stayed the night at my parents'. It was around 2 a.m., and I was downstairs watching TV in the living room. I went to go to the restroom and heard this sound again. The downstairs bathroom is in a small hallway that separates the downstairs foyer from the living room. I don't know why, but this time is scared the absolute fuck out of me. Like, I didn't even go to the bathroom. I hightailed it upstairs to my bedroom, leaving the downstairs TV on. I typically try to look at things logically for an explanation, especially with things like this, but I can't shake the ugly feeling I get when I hear these 3 snaps. Has anyone else ever had this experience? Also, is there any significance to weird unexplained sounds like this in the set of 3? Like, what the hell is this? This one is by u/Jaddy ZS. My first sighting. Hello. This event happened today, just a few minutes ago, and I'm terrified. My brother's visiting us, and he had just arrived at our house just 2 days ago. Today, we were debating on what restaurant to go to for dinner. Me being the picky type, I denied all the options. Now, I've been fairly paranoid in the apartment. Me and my mom lived on the top floor, so there was a hatch that leads to the attic. When deciding on where to go, I suggested that we take my dog, Jewel, out for a walk so she wouldn't go to the bathroom on the carpet. My mom and my brother had left to take Jewel out, leaving me in the apartment alone. Suddenly, when the front door closed, I heard a shudder that made me spin back to look into the hallway where the hatch was. Right when I looked, I saw the hatch leading to the attic closed with a shuddering slam. I screamed, running down to the door, begging my brother to open it. He did. When I forced them into the house, my mom grabbed a chair to check the hatchet. She couldn't find anything. There were only insulation and wood chips up there. Creepy. This one is by u/The Odd News, Ghost in the Coal Mine. I was born in 1968. I am the son of a miner father and a miner. I am the father of 2 children. The incident happened to me in the mine where I worked a year or 2 before I retired. Everything started after an accident in the mine. That day, I went to the workplace as usual. In the morning, after having breakfast in the canteen of the workplace, I got into the cage to go 260 meters underground. When I say cage, I mean an elevator. We mine workers preferred to call it a cage instead of an elevator because it was a simple device that worked with a large crane rather than an elevator. Anyway, I went down to the mine. After working until the end of the shift, I started walking towards the bottom of the shaft. We call the place where we go into the cage the bottom of the shaft. As I was walking slowly, an engine passed by me quickly. What I call an engine can be considered as a small train. It was a relatively simple device compared to the train, pulling only wagons weighing up to 1 ton at most. There were workers on the engine. Normally, they are forbidden to do this, but sometimes when the workers are very tired after work, they ride on the engine to avoid walking. I continued to walk slowly as the engine sped past me. There was shouting coming from up ahead. Someone seemed to be moaning in a wheezing voice. I moved towards the direction of the sound in order to understand exactly what was happening. I started to look around carefully. When I approached the place where the sound came from, I saw that someone was lying in the water channel on the side of the air door. Blood was flowing from the person lying in the water channel as if from a faucet. At that moment, I went into a short-term shock. In that chaos, we immediately carried the injured person to the lift entrance, which we call the bottom of the shaft, and sent him to the hospital. I still could not get over the shock of that image. That day, that person who was injured in that accident died. This incident affected me deeply. My psychology turned upside down. According to what I learned later, the accident happened as follows. While the workers were traveling with the engine, the air door did not open. Since the engine was also fast, the engine hit the door with great violence. The worker who was caught between the engine and the door was crushed badly during this impact. In the days following this incident, when I passed through that gate, it always seemed to me as if someone was still lying in the water channel. I couldn't pass through there by myself since the hearth was not sufficiently lit. It was always very dark inside the hearth. It was only illuminated by fluorescent lamps, which were very sparsely placed in certain parts of the hearth. Because of the effect of this incident, I was completely disenchanted with work. I didn't feel like going to work at all, but I had to. Anyway, one day when I was at work again, I was the last one left at the end of the work in the area of the mine where I was working. When I looked around, everyone had left. I sat down somewhere. Such a weight fell on me that it seemed like a lifetime to go from there to the lift area, which the workers called the bottom of the shaft. I said to myself, I'll rest a little where I'm sitting and then I'll go. My eyes closed for a while. I was between sleep and wakefulness. I saw a man approaching me from ahead, holding a lamp in his hand. There is no work left at the stove at this hour. I guess he stayed later like me, I said to myself. The light that was approaching me suddenly disappeared. Oh my God, where did this man go? I still said to myself. Then I thought, let me sit for 1 or 2 more minutes. Maybe the man who just disappeared will come back and we can go to the lift together. Then my eyes closed again. I don't know how much time passed. Suddenly I woke up with a very severe slap. But what a slap! I thought my neck was broken. I immediately recovered and looked around me. There was no one. It was impossible for somebody to hit me and run away. For this reason, I started running towards the lift in fear and panic. That day, I didn't tell anyone about what had happened. 1 or 2 weeks later, I was the last one again. This time, I hurried up and went straight to the lift entrance. As I sat down and waited for the lift to arrive, I noticed that something jet black was coming towards me. It had a hand lamp and a hard hat, but neither of them was lit. It was slowly approaching me. I called out from afar, "Mister, what's wrong? Did the lamp malfunction?" He didn't answer. Instead, it kept coming towards me slowly. I felt a strong sense of fear that I didn't know why. I wanted to get up and leave. I even wanted to run away, but I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. Although he was very close to me, I couldn't see his face or body clearly. It was as if the man coming towards me was not tangible substance but a shadow, a silhouette. "Don't ever sleep on the hearth again," he said to me. I could feel the man's speech not in my ears but in my brain. He spoke to me almost telepathically and disappeared. I have heard of such events from a few other people before, but I didn't believe it. At that moment, those stories I had heard went through my mind. I read all the prayers I knew. That black silhouette had not harmed me, but living that moment had further disrupted my already broken psychology. I couldn't get up from where I was sitting for another 1 to 2 minutes. After a while, I pulled myself together and walked away from there. When I told my friends what had happened to me, they did not believe me. When I told what happened to me to the imam of the village where I lived, the imam believed me and said the following: "They are the owners of the mines. As you know, according to Islamic belief, the souls of martyrs can choose to stay in this world instead of going to the hereafter if they wish. According to a saying of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, those who die under the rubble are considered martyrs, just like those who die in war. That's why we call people who died in mines mine martyrs. Most probably, the thing you saw in the mine was the spirit of a mine martyr, and it warns you. He wanted to protect you. After that day, I never slept in the mine again." About the story. Hello. I am a journalist living in Turkey. Investigating the paranormal is my special interest. The story you have just read is a true story that was shared with me by one of my readers on condition of anonymity. This one is by you/loser beta girl. My boyfriend doesn't believe that ghosts can fart. So last night we were having Lebanese food and we heard a really loud fart. The smell was extremely overwhelming. He told me through labored gags and gasps that I was disgusting, but it totally wasn't me. It was a ghost for sure and definitely not me. You guys have heard of ghost farts, right? A paranormal squeaker or something? Help. This one is by you /Rose_the_Umbria. Question I never got an answer to. So on November 24th, I saw 2 UFOs. A week or 2 weeks earlier, I saw 1 UFO. When the sky was clear again after a few weeks because it was cloudy for a while, they were both gone. I asked you/Ellen_Smithy82 to the same day and kept trying, but I never got an answer from them, yet they can tell me how they are doing. So can anyone please tell me if the UFOs I saw mean anything? Again, I saw 1 the week before and then 2 the week after, and when the sky was clear after a few weeks, both were gone. This one is by you/Incident Individual82. What are your real-life paranormal experiences? Okay, so they're asking for people to share their stories with them. This one is by you/Not-Average-to-You. The little doll that wanted my soul. The little doll had a spirit attached to it. We had a paranormal team come take it to a museum with other haunted artifacts local to us. We found them at a yard sale. They were both missing the same side leg. The owners and we joked about the dolls being haunted, and we bought them both for $5. When we got in the car to leave the yard sale, we found the dolls It started to hell with the sun shining. We ended up going to eat because there was no way we could shop the yard sales in the rain. After we'd gone and got done eating, about an hour later, we went to another yard sale a block away from where we got the dolls from. Everything was dry and nothing was out of place. I asked the lady how did she keep her stuff dry when that hail came through, and she didn't know what I was talking about. If my fiancé wasn't with me, I don't know if I would have believed myself. That night, my fiancé had a really bad dream about the smaller doll, and it was telling him to kill me. He woke up and thought he actually hurt me. I joined some groups and shared the picture of the dolls on Facebook. They immediately knew it was the little doll. My friend showed her mom the picture of the doll. Her mom wanted to come see it before the paranormal team took it. When they got to my apartment, she went to hold the doll, but immediately sat it back down because the energy was so overwhelming. I asked her if I should try to hold it because it was my doll. She said sure. I picked it up, and as soon as I did, I felt this sensation like a high almost start to come in through my feet and slowly inch its way up my body. When it got to my neck, I started choking and sobbing uncontrollably. Everyone yelled at me to put it down. I put it down, and the feeling went much faster back down, out through my feet, the same way it came in. My aunt almost died when she was in the car wreck, and I could feel her soul leaving through my feet, or through her feet. Whatever it was tried entering my body for sure. We all wanted to go outside to get some fresh air after that. We walked outside between the apartment buildings, and on the deck behind me, all of a sudden, there were like 5 big-ass crows behind me on the balcony, screeching at me like they wanted to attack us. Well, my friend and her mom went home. I don't blame them. Anyways, the paranormal team comes. The air is so heavy when you walk in my apartment, you can literally feel the energy. They start blessing the dolls and house, and the neighbor's dog is howling the whole time, which it never does. The lady carried a white stone to keep her grounded and protected, and she started freaking out because the stone turned hot. The energy level was a 3.5 out of 10. It was all so crazy. I'm so glad I have so many witnesses. If you look at the picture of just the one doll, if you zoom in to its right, which would be your left eye, you can see the outline of little boy's face. I didn't even notice that until this past year when someone pointed it out to me. Several people told me it was the spirit of a little boy. Well, on that note, boys and girls, it is time to say goodbye. I hope you guys had a very Merry Christmas and that you have an awesome rest of your week. Next week, we have the Paradox Paranormal Forum for New Year's Eve. And then we have story time once again with me, TessaTNT, on Sunday. You guys don't forget, we are all in this together. Together we can make the world a little better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. Until next time, nighty night, love and light. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I will see you back here, same time, same place.